Disabled little girl abandoned by her mom at the bus stop. What the lonely vampire king did next will haunt you forever. The wind tore through the city streets like claws scraping stone, rattling chain-link fences and rattling the bones of anyone foolish enough to be outside. At bus stop number 47, a single street lamp flickered overhead, its weak amber glow barely illuminating the cracked sidewalk below. Snow had begun to fall, soft at first, then heavier, blanketing the frozen benches, the overflowing trash bins, and the hunched shoulders of commuters who hurried past with their faces buried in scarves. And yet, in the middle of that desolate corner, there she sat, a little girl, alone. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. She was strapped into a rusted wheelchair that looked decades old, its metal frame pitted with corrosion and one wheel bent at an unnatural angle. The chair tilted dangerously to the left, forcing her small body to lean awkwardly as if she might tip onto the icy pavement at any moment. Her legs, thin, twisted inward, were tucked beneath a threadbare red dress whose hem was frayed and torn. One tiny foot had slipped free from the footrest and hung limp, swaying with each gust of wind. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. In her trembling hands, she clutched a bracelet made of cheap plastic beads, pink, yellow, faded blue, strung together on fraying elastic. She turned it slowly between her fingers, over and over, as though the motion itself could summon warmth, could summon safety. Her lips had gone pale. Her cheeks were mottled red and raw from the cold. But she didn't scream.
She didn't sob.
She only whispered, again and again, a broken little mantra barely louder than breath. Mommy, Mommy, I'm being good. Come back. People passed without stopping. A businessman in a heavy coat glanced at her, checked his watch, and kept walking. A teenage girl slowed, her eyes widening, but her friend tugged her arm, and they both hurried away. A group of men laughed from across the street, and one of them sneered loud enough to carry. What's wrong with that creepy kid? Someone tossed a crumpled soda can toward the wheelchair. It clattered against the wheel. Still, no one helped. The chair wobbled again as the wind picked up, the loose wheel squeaking in protest. Lila gripped the armrests with her small hands, panic flashing across her face. Snow gathered in her hair, on her shoulders, on the faded red fabric of her dress. And then, the temperature dropped. Not from the winter wind, not from the storm, from something older. Something that didn't belong in the mortal world. Across the street, the shadows seemed to thicken and coil. The air grew still, oppressively heavy, as though the city itself was holding its breath. And from that unnatural darkness, a carriage emerged. It was black as midnight, drawn by horses whose breath came out in plumes of frost. The carriage itself was ornate, impossibly elegant, lacquered wood inlaid with silver filigree, its windows frosted over as though the cold emanated from within. The wheels made no sound as they rolled across the slush-covered street. It stopped directly in front of the bus stop. The door opened, and a man stepped out.
Tall, pale,
otherworldly. Aldrich Varen moved like a predator, each step deliberate and silent. His long coat was embroidered with patterns that seemed to shift in the streetlight, silver threads that glinted like starlight on black water. His hair, pale as moonlight, fell past his shoulders, and his eyes, crimson, glowing faintly, swept across the street with the weight of centuries behind them. The few remaining pedestrians who noticed him instinctively looked away. Some crossed the street. Others quickened their pace. But Aldrich's gaze had already locked onto the small figure in red. He approached slowly, his boots silent against the snow-dusted pavement. When he reached her, he knelt, gracefully, deliberately, so that his eyes were level with hers. No towering, no intimidation, just presence. Lila looked up at him. Her wide eyes, blue and glassy with cold, didn't fill with fear. Instead, she blinked once, twice, and then whispered, "You look sad." For a moment, the vampire king, who had walked the earth for 1,000 years, who had commanded armies and crushed kingdoms, said nothing. Then his jaw tightened. He reached out slowly and touched the cold metal of her wheelchair. The frost bit at his gloved fingers. He looked around. Not a single soul had stopped. Not one. He looked back at Lila, at her trembling hands clutching that pathetic bracelet, at the way her breath came in shallow, shivering gasps, at the desperation hidden behind her obedience. Something inside him cracked. A memory, a shadow from a war-torn village centuries ago. A boy left behind in the snow, told his parents would return. They never did. Aldrich stood. Without a word, he unfastened the heavy cloak from his shoulders and draped it around Lila's small frame. It swallowed her completely, pooling around the wheelchair like a shroud of night. She leaned into the warmth immediately, her shivering slowing just slightly. He studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and ancient, but impossibly gentle. "What is your name, little one?" She looked up at him, blinking through the snowflakes clinging to her lashes. "Lila. Lila Rowan," she whispered, proud despite her fear. "Mommy said to tell people my name, so they know I'm real." Aldrich's expression didn't change, but his hands, gloved, steady, moved to the handles of her wheelchair. "Then I will remember it." He turned the chair smoothly, wheeling her toward the waiting carriage. Behind them, the bus stop sat empty now, save for the snow slowly bearing the place where she'd been left behind. And as he lifted her gently into the warmth of the carriage, her small voice echoed one last time into the frozen night. "Mommy, Mommy, don't leave me." The door closed. The horses stirred, and the carriage vanished into the storm as if it had never been there at all. Inside the carriage, warmth surrounded her like a living thing. Lila blinked, her small body still trembling beneath the weight of Aldrich's cloak. He sat across from her, silent, his crimson eyes watching her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. She coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and winced. Without a word, Aldrich reached into a hidden compartment and withdrew a silver flask. He uncorked it carefully and held it toward her.
Drink.
Slowly. She didn't have the strength to hold it herself. He tipped it gently to her lips, and she sipped something warm and sweet. Honey tea, perhaps, infused with herbs she didn't recognize. It soothed the rawness in her throat. When she finished, she leaned back, exhausted, her eyelids fluttering. Where are we going?" she whispered. Aldrich's gaze never wavered. "Somewhere you will never be cold again." Minutes, or perhaps hours, later, the carriage passed through a shimmering veil that bent the city lights into impossible shapes. When it stopped, they had arrived at a place that existed between worlds, a fortress of black stone and silver filigree, its towers crowned with frost and shadow. The night court. Aldrich carried her through the gates, ignoring the stunned gazes of the guards who bowed low as he passed. Inside, the halls were vast and silent, lit by floating orbs of pale blue light. Lila stared in wonder at the vaulted ceilings, the tapestries that seemed to move, the creatures that slipped through doorways and vanished before she could name them. He brought her to a chamber warmed by an enchanted hearth. The bed was piled high with furs and silk. Glass baubles hung from the ceiling, catching the firelight and casting rainbows across the walls. Aldrich set her gently on the bed, adjusting the pillows so she could sit upright. Then he stepped back, as though uncertain what to do next. Lila looked up at him, clutching the edge of his cloak. "Mommy said good girls don't make trouble," she whispered. "I'll be good. I promise." And for the first time in 800 years, the vampire king felt something break inside his chest. The chamber fell silent save for the crackling of enchanted flames in the hearth. Aldrich stood motionless beside the bed, his ancient eyes fixed on the small child who had just promised to be good, as though being good could somehow protect her from a world that had already failed her. Before he could respond, the air in the room shifted. A presence materialized at the doorway, not through the door itself, but through the shadows beside it. A woman stepped forward, tall and ethereal, her silver robes seeming to flow like water, even when she stood still. Her hair was white as frost, and her eyes, milky, clouded, unseeing yet somehow piercing, fixed immediately on Lila. "Saren," Aldrich said quietly, his tone carrying both acknowledgement and warning. Saren Vale, the night court seer, tilted her head as though listening to voices only she could hear. When she spoke, her voice was layered, distant, like an echo from the bottom of a well. "She is bright in the dark, my king." Saren's blind gaze never wavered from Lila. "Impossibly bright. I saw her arrival in fragments weeks ago, but I did not understand until now." Lila shrank back slightly against the pillows, clutching Aldrich's cloak tighter around herself. Aldrich moved subtly, placing himself between them. "She is under my protection." "I know." Saren's expression softened, and she lowered her head in a respectful bow. "I mean her no harm, but the court will have questions." As if summoned by her words, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. A moment later, a man appeared in the doorway, broad-shouldered, clad in black armor etched with silver runes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. His face was sharp, severe, and his hand rested instinctively on the hilt of the blade at his hip. Dorian Crest, General of the Night Guard, surveyed the room with a soldier's precision. His gaze landed on Lila, and his jaw tightened. "My lord," he said, his voice clipped. "Is it true? You've brought a human child into the court." Before Aldrich could answer, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost crept across the window panes, and the flames in the hearth flickered wildly. From the shadows near the balcony, wind and ice coalesced into the form of another figure, lean, wrapped in storm-gray robes, his silver hair crackling with static. Male Thorn, sentinel of the northern wards, stepped fully into the room, his pale eyes glowing faintly. He looked at Lila, then at Aldrich, then back at Lila again. The wards trembled when she crossed, Male said quietly, his voice like distant thunder. They didn't reject her. They welcomed her. That should not be possible. Aldrich's expression remained impassive, but his hand rested protectively on the back of Lila's chair. "She is my guest. That is all you need to know." Dorian's eyes flashed. "With respect, my king, that is not all we need to know. A human child in the night court is a security risk. She could be a spy, a trap, She is 3 years old and can barely walk," Aldrich interrupted, his tone glacial. "If you believe her a threat, Dorian, then your tactical instincts have grown dull." Dorian stiffened, but didn't back down. "It's not her intent I question. It's the attention she'll draw. The other courts will hear of this. The mortal authorities may come searching. And if she dies here, she will not die here." The words hung in the air like a blade. Aldrich's crimson eyes blazed, and for a moment, the ancient power that slept beneath his calm exterior flickered to the surface. The temperature dropped further. The shadows in the room deepened. Dorian lowered his gaze. "As you command." Saren stepped forward, her expression troubled. "My king, I do not doubt your intentions. But the child is entangled in something greater than abandonment. Her threads stretch into futures I cannot yet read clearly. Some end in light. Others—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "We must tread carefully." Male approached the bed slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Lila. She watched him back, wide-eyed but unafraid, her small fingers still gripping the bracelet. "What is that?" Male asked, nodding toward the beads. "It was with her when I found her," Aldrich replied. Saren's blind eyes suddenly focused, her expression sharpening. She moved forward with startling speed and reached toward Lila's hand. "May I?" Lila hesitated, glancing at Aldrich. He gave a slight nod. Saren's fingers brushed the bracelet, and she gasped, jerking back as though burned. Her clouded eyes rolled back, and for a moment, she swayed on her feet. Male caught her arm, steadying her. "Saren." Aldrich's voice was edged with concern. The seer's breathing came in sharp, ragged bursts. When she spoke again, her voice was strained. "I saw her. The mother. I saw the moment she left. Aldrich's expression darkened. Then you saw her cruelty.
No.
Saren's voice cracked. I saw her grief. She was weeping, my king, sobbing as though her heart was tearing in two. She didn't abandon the child out of malice. She abandoned her out of desperation. Silence fell over the room. Lila's small voice broke it. Mommy was crying? Everyone turned to look at her. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over her flushed cheeks. She said she loved me. She said she was sorry. Lila's voice trembled. I thought I was bad. I thought she didn't want me anymore. Aldrich knelt beside the bed, his expression unreadable, but his movements impossibly gentle. You were not bad, Lila. You are not bad. But then why? I do not know yet. His voice was soft, but beneath it was a current of steel. But I will find out. He stood and turned to his guardians, his demeanor shifting back into the cold authority of a king. Dorian, assign 2 sentries to watch this wing. No one enters without my permission. Male, examine the wards further. I want to know why they reacted to her. And you, my king? Saren asked quietly. Aldrich's crimson gaze drifted back to Lila, who was now clutching the bracelet against her chest, tears still streaming down her face. I will ensure she is settled. Then I will begin searching for answers. And when will you find the mother? Dorian asked carefully. Aldrich's jaw tightened. That depends on what I discover. The 3 guardians exchanged glances, but said nothing further. One by one, they bowed and withdrew, leaving Aldrich alone with the child once more. He returned to her bedside and gently brushed the tears from her cheeks with the edge of his glove. Rest now, he murmured. You are safe here. Lila sniffled, her eyelids already drooping with exhaustion. You won't leave me, will you? Aldrich hesitated. Then, slowly, he pulled a chair beside the bed and sat. I will stay until you sleep. A faint, fragile smile touched her lips. Thank you, Mr. Vampire King. Despite everything, Aldrich felt the corner of his mouth twitch. And as Lila's breathing eventually softened into the rhythm of sleep, Aldrich sat motionless in the flickering firelight, his mind already turning toward the mystery of Maris Rowan and the choice that had brought her daughter into his world. The night court had fallen into its deepest silence, the hour when even immortals paused to rest. But in his private study high in the Eastern Tower, Aldrich Varen sat awake, as he had for centuries. Candlelight flickered across walls lined with ancient tomes and maps that charted territories long forgotten by the mortal world. On his desk sat a scrying mirror, a disk of polished obsidian that reflected not the room around him, but the guest chamber 3 floors below. In it, Lila slept, her small form nearly swallowed by the mound of blankets and furs. Her breathing was steady now, no longer the shallow, rattling gasps from hours before. One hand still clutched the cheap bracelet even in sleep. Aldrich told himself he was simply ensuring her safety.
But he knew it was more than that.
He couldn't look away. The image in the mirror blurred slightly, and unbidden, a memory rose from the depths of his mind, a memory he had buried beneath 1,000 years of carefully constructed coldness. Winter. It's always winter. He had been 7 years old, small for his age, shivering in a tattered cloak as smoke rose from burning villages in the distance. His mother had gripped his shoulders too tightly, her face pale and streaked with ash. Stay here, Aldrich.
Right here by the shrine.
We'll come back for you when it's safe. His father had pressed a small wooden carving into his hand, a horse, crudely made but cherished. Be brave, boy. We'll return before nightfall. They had walked away quickly, too quickly, disappearing into the chaos of fleeing refugees and advancing soldiers.
Nightfall came.
They did not. He had waited 3 days at that ruined shrine, clutching the wooden horse, telling himself they would come back, that they hadn't abandoned him, that he had been good enough, quiet enough, obedient enough. On the 4th day, the vampire found him. The transformation had been agony. The centuries that followed had been worse, serving a master who saw him only as a weapon, as property, as something to be used until he was either strong enough to break free or destroyed in the attempt. He had chosen freedom, and paid for it in blood. Aldrich's jaw tightened as he pulled himself back to the present. His hand had unconsciously moved to the spot on his chest where his heart no longer beat. Small child, winter, abandonment, the uncertainty of whether they'll ever return. Lila was a mirror held up to his own past, and the reflection burned. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against stone. He couldn't simply sit and watch. He needed answers. Aldrich descended to the central chamber where his guardians waited, already summoned by silent command. Saren stood near the window, her fingers trailing through the air as though reading invisible threads. Dorian was checking the edge of his blade. Mael stood with arms crossed, frost still clinging to his robes. "Find her," Aldrich said without preamble. "The mother. Maris Rowan." Saren turned, her clouded eyes distant. "The bracelet still carries her essence. I can trace the emotional echoes back to their source, but it will take time. Then begin now." Dorian sheathed his blade. "I'll deploy scouts into the mortal districts. If she's still in the city, we'll find her within 2 nights." Mael's eyes gleamed. "I'll ride the storm wind above the buildings. Grief and desperation leave a scent. I'll follow it." Aldrich nodded once, his expression carved from stone. "Bring me information, not blood. I want to understand her choice before I pass judgment." The 3 guardians exchanged brief glances. This was not the merciless king they had known for centuries. But none of them questioned him aloud. They dispersed into shadow, storm, and vision. Aldrich remained alone in the echoing chamber for a long moment before turning back toward the guest wing. By the time dawn's first light, filtered and dimmed by the court's enchantments, touched the towers, Lila had woken. Aldrich found her in the corridor outside her room, her wheelchair positioned near a tall window. She was reaching upward toward a small, bat-like creature that clung to the curtain rod, its leathery wings folded and its tiny eyes blinking curiously. "Hello, little bat," she whispered. "Are you lost too?" The creature chittered softly and fluttered down to perch on the armrest of her wheelchair. Lila giggled, delighted, and gently stroked its head with one finger. "I'm going to call you Pippin," she announced. The bat seemed to accept this with a dignified bob of its head. Aldrich watched from the shadows, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. "Good morning, mister." "Mr. Aldrich," Lila said, turning toward him with a bright smile that stumbled adorably over his name. From somewhere down the hall, Aldrich heard Mael's poorly suppressed snort of amusement. He stepped forward, allowing himself a faint smile. "It is simply Aldrich, but you may call me what you wish." "Aldrich," she repeated carefully, then beamed when she got it right. "Can Pippin stay with me?" "If he wishes to." The bat chirped and settled more comfortably on her armrest, apparently content. Lila wheeled herself slowly down the corridor, the uneven wool squeaking against the polished black marble. The sound echoed through the vast halls, a small, mortal noise in an immortal place. She paused near a tapestry depicting a winter battlefield and reached up toward it, fascinated by the silver thread woven through the fabric. As her fingers stretched upward, something extraordinary happened. Tiny snowflakes began to materialize in the air above her hands, delicate, crystalline, glowing faintly with pale blue light. They swirled in a gentle spiral, dancing around her fingers. Lila gasped and pulled her hands back. The snowflakes vanished instantly. She stared at her palms, confused. Did you see that?" Aldrich had frozen in place, his crimson eyes wide. "I did." "Was that magic?" Her voice was hushed. Odd. "Yes. But Mommy said magic isn't real." "Your mother," Aldrich said carefully, kneeling beside her wheelchair, "may not have known what you carried inside you." Lila looked down at her hands again, turning them over slowly. For a moment, wonder filled her expression, but then it crumbled into something smaller, sadder. "Is that why she left me?" she whispered. "Because I'm weird?"
"No."
Aldrich's voice was firm, almost fierce. "You're not weird. You are extraordinary." Tears welled in her eyes. Then why didn't she want me? Was I too heavy? Too slow? Did I make her tired? The word struck him like a blade to the chest. Aldrich reached out and gently took her small hands in his gloved ones. Listen to me, Lila Rowan. Whatever your mother's reasons, they were not because you were lacking. Do you understand? She sniffled, nodding hesitantly. I will find her, he continued, his voice low and resolute. And I will learn the truth. But until then, you must believe me when I say that you are not a burden. You are not too much. You are exactly as you should be. Lila wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, then leaned forward and wrapped her small arms around his neck in a sudden, fierce hug. Aldrich went utterly still. Then, slowly, his arms came up to return the embrace. Thank you, Aldrich, she whispered against his shoulder. When she finally pulled back, she smiled tremulously and wheeled herself toward the window again, Pippin still perched loyally on her armrest. Aldrich stood, his expression unreadable, but something fundamental had shifted inside him. I will not let her feel worthless. Not as I did. That evening, Saren appeared in his study, her expression grave. I have found her. Aldrich set down the tome he had been pretending to read. Where? A tenement in the Eastern Mortal District. 4th floor, apartment 4C. The building is falling apart, my king. And so is she. Explain. Saren's voice softened. She is ill. Desperately so. Drowning in debts she cannot pay. The vision showed me eviction notices, empty medicine bottles, unanswered pleas for help. She did not abandon Lila out of cruelty, Aldrich. She abandoned her out of despair. Aldrich's hands curled into fists. Then I will hear her story from her own lips. And if you find her broken beyond repair? He met Saren's clouded gaze. Then I will decide what mercy looks like. He rose, fastening his coat. Prepare mail. We leave tonight. Saren bowed. As you command. As Aldrich descended the tower stairs, he cast one final glance toward the scrying mirror. Lila was asleep again, Pippin curled at her side. And for the first time in centuries, Aldrich found himself hoping. Not for vengeance, but for understanding. The city looked different through a predator's eyes. Aldrich and Mail moved through the streets like shadows given form, unseen by the mortals who hurried past with their collars turned up against the cold. The neon signs that had seemed garish and bright to human eyes now appeared muted, dull. The sounds of traffic and voices blurred into a distant hum beneath the sharper symphony of heartbeats, breath, and blood. But Aldrich wasn't hunting tonight. He was searching for answers. They reached the Eastern District as midnight approached, a part of the city the developers had forgotten, where buildings sagged under the weight of neglect and broken dreams. Mail materialized fully beside him as they stopped before a crumbling tenement, its brick facade stained with decades of pollution and rain. 4th floor, Mail said quietly, his breath misting in the frigid air. The wards are thin here. Mortal desperation has worn them down. Aldrich's gaze traveled up the building's face. Several windows were boarded over. Others flickered with the weak light of cheap bulbs or candles. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. They entered. The lobby smelled of mildew and old cigarette smoke. The elevator bore a handwritten sign. Out of order. The stairs were narrow, the railing loose, each step creaking under their weight despite their supernatural grace. By the time they reached the 4th floor, Aldrich could sense her.
Fear.
Sickness. A grief so thick it seemed to seep through the walls themselves. Apartment 4C sat at the end of a dimly lit hallway where the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered erratically. The door was thin, the lock flimsy. Aldrich could hear everything beyond it. Labored breathing, a wet cough, the rustle of paper.
And weeping.
Quiet, broken, hopeless. He didn't knock. The door opened at his touch, the lock yielding as if it understood the futility of resistance. The apartment was barely larger than a closet. A single room served as bedroom, kitchen, and living space. The walls were water-stained, the paint peeling in long strips. A narrow mattress lay on the floor in one corner, its sheets twisted and unwashed. The kitchenette consisted of a hot plate and a rust-stained sink. A small folding table was buried beneath piles of paper, bills stamped in red ink, eviction notices, collection agency letters. And in the center of it all, sitting on the cold floor with her back against the wall, was Maris Rowan. She was thin, too thin, her cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin. Her dark hair hung limp and unwashed around her shoulders. She wore a threadbare sweater several sizes too large, and her hands trembled as they clutched a small photograph. Prescription bottles lay scattered around her, some empty, some still sealed because she couldn't afford to fill them all. A half-packed suitcase sat open nearby, containing a few pieces of clothing and nothing else. She was coughing, deep, rattling coughs that shook her entire frame. When the fit passed, she pressed her forehead against her knees and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Please be warm. Please be safe. Please forgive me." Aldrich stepped fully into the room. The temperature dropped instantly. The flickering bulb overhead dimmed further, and shadows deepened in the corners. Maris's head snapped up. Her eyes, red-rimmed and glassy with fever, widened in terror. She scrambled backward until her shoulders hit the wall, one hand raised defensively. I don't have the rent," she gasped. "I know I'm late, but please, just give me another week." Then she truly looked at him, at his pale skin, his crimson eyes, the way the shadows seemed to cling to him like a living cloak. "What?" Her voice broke. "What are you?" Aldrich said nothing. Instead, he raised his hand, and in his palm rested the bracelet of cheap plastic beads, pink, yellow, faded blue. Maris's breath stopped. Her eyes locked onto the bracelet, and all the color drained from her face. She began to shake violently, her lips forming words that wouldn't come. "Lila," she finally choked out. You have my Lila. Is she?" Her voice cracked into a sob. "Is she alive? Please, please tell me she's alive." She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She collapsed back to the floor, reaching toward him with desperate, trembling hands. "Is she warm? Is she safe? Is she scared? Please." "She is alive." Aldrich's voice cut through her panic like a blade. "She is warm. She is sheltered." Maris dissolved into sobs so violent they seemed to tear from her very soul. She pressed her hands over her mouth, rocking back and forth. "Thank God," she gasped between sobs. "Thank God, thank God, thank God." Aldrich's expression remained cold, carved from stone. "Why did you leave her in the snow to die?" The question struck her like a physical blow. Maris's head jerked up, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't trying to kill her. I was trying to save her. By abandoning her at a bus stop in the middle of winter? Because I couldn't do it anymore." The words exploded from her, raw and ragged. I couldn't watch her suffer. I couldn't keep failing her every single day. She gestured wildly at the apartment around them. "Look at this place. Look at it. I lost my job 6 months ago. The disability payment stopped. The clinic won't see her without insurance. I can't afford her medications, her physical therapy, her specialists. I can't afford anything." Her voice broke into coughing again, violent and wet. When she could breathe, she continued, her words tumbling over each other. "I'm sick. The doctors say it's serious, but I can't afford the treatments. I can't even afford the tests to know how bad it is. And Lila, God, Lila needs so much. She needs surgeries, equipment, constant care." Maris pulled herself up using the wall, swaying on her feet. She grabbed a stack of papers and thrust them toward Aldrich with shaking hands. "This is what I owe. $14,000 in medical debt. 3 months behind on rent. Eviction notice came last week. Utilities shut off next Monday. I applied for assistance 17 times 17 and got rejected every single time because I don't qualify, because the system is broken, because—" She stopped, choking on her words. Tears dripped from her chin onto the crumpled papers. "She was going to die with me," Maris whispered. In this freezing apartment with no heat, no food, no medicine. I couldn't let that happen. I hoped that if I left her somewhere visible, someone with resources, someone who could actually help her. Her voice failed entirely. She sank back to the floor, burying her face in her hands. I thought she'd have a chance. A real chance. Not this, not this. Aldrich stood motionless, the bracelet still in his hand. Behind him, Mail remained silent in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Aldrich's gaze traveled across the room, taking in details he'd initially overlooked. A notebook on the floor, pages covered in cramped handwriting. He crossed the room and picked it up. The pages were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Lila. All unsent. My sweet girl, I hope you're somewhere warm tonight. Lila, I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger for you. Baby, I pray someone kind found you. I pray you forgive me someday. The pages were stained, with tears, with time, with the desperate hope that writing them would somehow undo what she'd done. Aldrich closed the notebook slowly. When he looked at Maris again, something in his expression had shifted, though his voice remained quiet, controlled. You believed you were condemning her. I was condemning her. Maris's voice was hoarse. I condemned her to a life without her mother, but at least she'd be alive. And yourself? What did you plan to do? Maris laughed bitterly, gesturing at the half-packed suitcase. Does it matter? I have nowhere to go. No one to turn to. I was just waiting. For the eviction. For the sickness to finish what poverty started. Silence filled the tiny apartment. Then Aldrich moved. He crossed the room and, to Maris's shock, knelt before her, just as he had knelt before Lila at the bus stop. His crimson eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something other than coldness in them. Your daughter is safe in my care, he said quietly. She is warm. She is fed. She is healing. And she asks for you every day. Maris's breath hitched. She remembers me? She remembers you told her to be good. She clutches the bracelet you made her as though it is the only thing anchoring her to this world. Fresh tears spilled down Maris's cheeks. She believed she was abandoned because she was burdensome. Aldrich continued, his voice hardening slightly. She believed she was too slow, too heavy, too broken to be loved. No. Maris reached for him desperately. That's not. I love her. I've always loved her. Then tell her yourself. Maris froze. What? Aldrich stood, extending his hand toward her. You have a choice, Maris Rowan. Remain here in your despair and let it consume you. Or come into my world, accept my protection, my resources, and help me raise the child we both refuse to abandon. Maris stared at his outstretched hand as though it were an impossible thing. You're not going to punish me? Take her away forever. You are not my enemy, Aldrich said simply. You are a mother who made an impossible choice. And your daughter deserves to know that. Maris looked down at her trembling hands, then back up at him. If I come with you, what happens to me? You live, you heal, and you learn what it means to not face the world alone. Slowly, hesitantly, Maris reached up and placed her hand in his. His grip was cool, impossibly strong, and somehow steady. Then I'll come, she whispered. Aldrich helped her to her feet. Mail stepped forward, producing a dark cloak that he draped over her thin shoulders. As they prepared to leave, Maris glanced back at the apartment one last time, at the life she'd lost, the desperation that had nearly destroyed her. Then she turned away and followed the vampire king into the night. The days that followed Aldrich's departure fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Lila had never known a place like the night court. In her mother's tiny apartment, she had learned to make herself small, to stay quiet, to need as little as possible. Here, the halls stretched endlessly in every direction, vast and echoing, and yet somehow she never felt lost. The guardians, once wary, had begun to soften around her. Saren would appear in the library at odd hours, her clouded eyes distant but her voice gentle as she taught Lila the names of constellations that mortal astronomers had long forgotten. That one is called Velithra, Saren said one evening, pointing toward a tapestry that depicted the night sky as it appeared from the court's hidden vantage. The Wanderer's Guide. It only appears to those who have lost their way. Lila traced the silver threads with her finger. Like me? Saren smiled faintly. Perhaps. Or perhaps you were never lost at all. Perhaps you were simply heading somewhere you didn't yet know existed. Mael, too, had warmed to her presence, though he would never admit it aloud. He would conjure small gusts of wind that made her hair fly up and sent Pippin flapping indignantly around the room. Lila would dissolve into giggles, clapping her hands in delight, and Mael's stern expression would crack just slightly at the edges. Even Dorian, stoic, immovable Dorian, had been worn down. One afternoon, Lila had wheeled herself to the ramparts where he stood on patrol, his dark armor gleaming in the muted light. "Can I see?" she had asked, her small voice almost swallowed by the wind. Dorian had stared at her for a long moment, then sighed and bent down. "Hold on tightly." He pushed her wheelchair slowly along the stone walkway, pointing out the towers, the gates, the distant shimmer of the wards that kept the court hidden from mortal eyes. Lila had listened, enraptured, asking questions that he answered with surprising patience. When they returned inside, Mael had smirked at him from across the hall. Dorian's glare could have melted steel, but Lila noticed none of the tension. She only knew that the people here, strange and powerful as they were, hadn't turned her away. Still, she asked about her mother every day. "Where is Mommy?" she would whisper to Aldrich whenever he checked on her before dawn. "Is she coming back?" "She is safe," Aldrich would tell her, his voice quiet. "And yes, she will come back." "Does she still love me?" She never stopped. Lila would nod, trying to believe him, but doubt lingered in her wide eyes. Sometimes she would ask different questions, ones that cut deeper without meaning to. "Aldrich," she said one night as he sat reading near her bed, "why do you look sad even when you smile?" He had looked up sharply, caught off guard. "I am not sad." "Yes, you are." She said it with the certainty only a child could muster. "You look like Mommy did." Before she left, Aldrich had no answer for that. Her magic continued to manifest in small, unpredictable bursts. Candles would flare brighter when she clapped in excitement. Once, during a nightmare, ghostly light had swirled around her trembling fingers, forming protective spirals that calmed her back into sleep before anyone could intervene. And most strangely, Aldrich felt no hunger near her. Vampires were drawn to human blood like moths to flame. The scent should have been maddening, especially from a child whose veins pulsed so close to fragile skin. But when Aldrich was near Lila, he felt only warmth. It was unnatural, impossible, and deeply unsettling to those who noticed. On the 5th night after Lila's arrival, Saren summoned Aldrich to the ritual chamber deep beneath the fortress. He found Lila already there, seated in her wheelchair at the center of a circle drawn in glowing runes. She looked nervous but curious, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "What is this?" Aldrich asked. Saren stood at the edge of the circle, her expression grave. "A confirmation. I have suspected since the moment she crossed our wards, but now I must know for certain." She raised her hands, and the runes blazed brighter. Light, pure, silver, and cold, rose from the markings and wrapped around Lila like gentle ribbons. Lila gasped but didn't pull away. The light seemed to recognize her, bending toward her fingers, swirling around her hair. Saren's voice echoed through the chamber, layered and distant. "She is Lumenblood, born of light magic, a force that exists to repel shadow, to burn away darkness." Aldrich's jaw tightened. "Then why does she not burn me?" Saren opened her clouded eyes and looked directly at him. "Because she is not your opposite, my king. She is your balance." The runes dimmed, and the light faded. Lila blinked, looking down at her hands in wonder. "What does that mean?" she asked softly. "It means," Aldrich said carefully, kneeling beside her, "that you are very special, Lila, and very rare." "Is that good?" "Yes," he said, but his expression darkened. "Though not everyone will see it that way." The political storm arrived 2 nights later. A contingent of vampire nobles, lesser lords from territories across the hidden realms, demanded an audience. Aldrich received them in the throne hall, his guardians flanking him, his expression carved from ice. Lord Helverin, an ancient vampire with eyes like burnt amber, stepped forward. "We have heard troubling rumors, King Varen. A human child resides within your court. A child with lumen blood. Your information is accurate," Aldrich said flatly. "What of it? What of it?" Helverin's voice sharpened. "Such power in the hands of a child is dangerous. She must be trained, controlled, weaponized before our enemies learn of her existence." Another noble, Lady Carith, stepped forward, her pale face twisted with disdain. "Or destroyed. Light magic is a threat to our kind. Keeping her here is madness." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled lords. Aldrich's crimson eyes blazed. The temperature in the hall plummeted. Frost crept across the marble floor. "Let me make myself perfectly clear," he said, his voice soft but lethal. "Lila Rowan is under my protection. She is not a weapon. She is not a threat. She is a child. A child who could obliterate half this court if her power manifests fully," Halvern countered. "Then it is fortunate," Aldrich said, rising from his throne, "that I am here to ensure that does not happen." He descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing like a hammer blow. "Any who seek to harm her, control her, or use her will answer to me personally. And I assure you, my mercy has limits." The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Even Halvern took a step back. "You risk civil war over a mortal girl," Carith hissed.
No.
Aldrich's smile was cold and razor-sharp. "I promise it." The nobles departed in tense silence. After they were gone, Dorian approached, his expression troubled. "You know they will not let this rest. Harboring her has made you enemies within our own ranks. Let them come." Aldrich's voice was iron. "I have faced worse. And if they band together, then they will learn why I am king." Dorian nodded slowly, but said nothing more. That night, Aldrich returned to Lila's chamber to find her already asleep, Pippin curled on her pillow. A faint glow surrounded her, soft, silvery, like moonlight made tangible. He sat in the chair beside her bed, as had become his habit, and watched the rise and fall of her breathing. The light from her magic touched his shadow where it fell across the floor, and the darkness there seemed softer, less absolute. Mail appeared silently in the doorway. "She's changing this place," the sentinel said quietly. "Changing you." Aldrich didn't look away from Lila. "I know. Is that wise?" "Perhaps not." A faint, bitter smile touched his lips. "But I find I no longer care." Mail studied him for a long moment, then inclined his head and vanished back into the shadows. Aldrich remained, a king of eternal night, keeping watch over a child of light, as the ancient fortress settled into an uneasy peace around them. Maris arrived at the night court just after sunset, escorted by Mail through the shimmering veil that separated the mortal world from the hidden realm. She stumbled as they crossed the threshold, gasping as reality bent and reformed around her. When her vision cleared, she found herself standing before gates of black iron wrought into shapes that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Where am I?" "Somewhere you were never meant to see," Mail said, not unkindly. "But the king has willed it. Come." The fortress loomed above her, all Gothic spires and shadowed towers, impossibly vast and ancient. Creatures moved in the darkness at the edges of her vision. Servants in dark robes bowed as they passed, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Maris's hands trembled. Every instinct screamed that she didn't belong here, that mortals were not meant to walk these halls. But then Mail pushed open a set of carved double doors, and she saw her. Lila. The little girl sat in her wheelchair near a window, Pippin perched on her shoulder. She was wearing a clean red dress, new, well-fitted, and her hair had been carefully braided. She looked warm, federal alive. "Mommy?" Lila's voice cracked the careful composure Maris had been clinging to. Lila. Maris rushed forward, dropping to her knees and pulling her daughter into her arms. The wheelchair tilted dangerously, but she didn't care. She buried her face in Lila's hair, sobbing openly. I'm sorry, baby, I'm so sorry. You came back. Lila clung to her mother's neck, her small body shaking. You came back, you came back. I'll never leave again, I promise, I promise. But even as she said it, fear gnawed at Maris's heart. Would they let her stay? Would they take Lila away now that she was here? A shadow fell across them. Maris looked up to find Aldrich standing in the doorway, his crimson eyes unreadable. She instinctively tightened her hold on Lila. The council has been summoned, Aldrich said quietly. They will decide your daughter's fate. And yours. Maris's blood ran cold. What does that mean? It means, he said, his expression softening almost imperceptibly as he looked at Lila, that we must convince them to let you both stay. The throne hall was vast and intimidating, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow. Rows of vampire lords and ladies filled the chamber, their pale faces turned toward the dais where Aldrich's throne sat, a massive seat carved from black stone and silver. Maris stood at the center of the hall, Lila's wheelchair beside her. Aldrich had taken his place on the throne, his guardians arrayed behind him. The weight of dozens of immortal gazes pressed down on her like a physical force. Lord Halvran stepped forward first, his burnt amber eyes fixed on Lila. The child possesses lumen blood, a power that has not been seen in 3 centuries. She is a strategic asset of incalculable value. By rights, she belongs to the crown. She belongs to no one, Maris said, her voice shaking but defiant. She's my daughter. Lady Caratha's laugh was cold and sharp. Your daughter? You abandoned her in the snow to die. What claim do you have now? I made a mistake. Maris's hands clenched into fists. I was desperate. I was dying. And I thought someone else could give her a better life than I could. And now you wish to reclaim her? Another noble sneered. How convenient, now that the king has cleaned her, fed her, sheltered her. I never stopped loving her. Maris's voice cracked, raw with emotion. Not for a single moment. I left her because I loved her, because I couldn't watch her die slowly in my arms. Love is not enough, Halvran said coldly. The child requires resources, protection, and training. Things a mortal cannot provide. Then let the king provide them, Maris shot back. But don't take her from me. Please. The issue, interjected an older vampire with silver hair, is not merely custody. The child's power creates a dangerous precedent. Light and shadow should not coexist. Their bond threatens the ancient balance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Lila looked up at her mother, confused and frightened. Mommy? What are they saying? Maris knelt and cupped Lila's face. It's okay, baby. Mommy's going to fix this. But she had no idea how. Then Aldrich rose from his throne. The chamber fell silent. He descended the steps slowly, his presence commanding absolute attention. When he reached the center of the hall, he turned to face the assembled nobles. You speak of balance, he said, his voice carrying through the vast space. Of precedent. Of strategic value. His gaze swept across them, cold and unyielding. But you forget that Lila Rowan is not a weapon. She is a child. A child with unprecedented power, Halvran began. A child who deserves a family, Aldrich cut him off. Not handlers, not trainers. A family. He turned to Maris, and something unspoken passed between them. Then he looked back at the council. I do not seek to strip Maris Rowan of her motherhood. I seek to stand beside her, to offer the protection, resources, and immortality that will ensure Lila's safety, while her mother provides what I cannot, humanity, warmth, and the love of the woman who gave her life. Shocked silence filled the hall. You propose shared guardianship? Lady Caratha's voice was incredulous. A mortal and a vampire king, raising a lumen blood child together? Yes. That is unprecedented. Many things about this situation are unprecedented, Aldrich said flatly. That does not make them wrong. Halvrin stepped forward, his expression dark. And what happens when the mortal dies, as all mortals do? When Lila is left grieving and vulnerable? Then I will be there, Aldrich said quietly. As I am now. As I will be for as long as she needs me. Dorian shifted subtly, placing himself between two nobles whose hands had drifted toward concealed weapons. Mael's eyes glowed faintly, storm wind crackling at his fingertips. Saren stepped forward, her clouded eyes distant. I have seen the futures that branch from this moment. In the ones where the child is taken from both her guardians and treated as a tool, she becomes a weapon of terrible destruction, one that will tear this court apart from within. She turned her blind gaze toward the council. But in the future where she is loved, protected, and raised by both the king and her mother, she becomes something far greater. A bridge between light and shadow. A hope for unity we have not known in millennia. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, an ancient vampire near the back spoke, his voice like gravel. A trial period. 6 months. The mortal may remain under strict supervision. If the arrangement proves viable, we revisit the matter then. Murmurs of reluctant agreement spread through the chamber. Aldrich's jaw tightened, but he inclined his head. Acceptable. Halvrin looked displeased, but didn't argue further. The council began to disperse, nobles filing out in tense clusters. When the hall finally emptied, only Aldrich, Maris, and the sleeping Lila remained. Maris stood awkwardly, her arms wrapped around herself. Thank you. I don't know what else to say. Aldrich approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Her voice was thick with emotion. Without you, she'd be dead. And so would I. He was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, your daughter reminded me what it means to care for someone fragile. Someone who depends entirely on the choices you make. He looked at Lila's sleeping form. I had forgotten that feeling. I did not realize how much I missed it. Maris wiped at her eyes. I don't understand this world. I don't understand you. But I know you saved her when no one else would. And you gave her life when no one else could. They stood in the echoing silence, two people from impossibly different worlds, bound together by the small girl sleeping between them. Finally, Maris extended her hand, shaky, uncertain, but sincere. Partners, then? Aldrich looked at her hand for a long moment. Then slowly he took it. Partners. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a beginning. 3 months later, the night court had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Where once silence had reigned absolute, now the halls sometimes echoed with a child's laughter. Where shadows had gathered undisturbed for centuries, small wheels now squeaked across polished stone, followed by the patient footsteps of a mother learning to navigate a world that should have been impossible. Lila's days had fallen into a careful rhythm, one built around healing. Mortal physicians arrived under cover of darkness, ushered through the wards by Mael, their memories carefully guarded by Saren's magic. They examined Lila's spine, her joints, her weakened muscles, and marveled at the resources Aldrich placed at their disposal without question or limit. The inflammation has decreased significantly, one doctor reported, reviewing X-rays that glowed with faint traces of magical enhancement. Whatever you're doing, it's working. What they were doing was unprecedented. In a chamber deep within the fortress, Mael and Saren worked in tandem, the sentinel channeling precise currents of wind and cold to reduce swelling, while the seer wove threads of light magic through Lila's damaged tissues, encouraging them to remember what wholeness felt like. Lila would lie on a padded table, sometimes wincing, sometimes giggling when the magic tickled. And always Aldrich or Maris, or both, would be there, holding her hand. You're doing so well, baby, Maris would whisper, smoothing her daughter's hair. Brave as a knight, Aldrich would add quietly, and Lila would beam with pride. Even Maris had begun to change. She had been terrified at first, of the creatures that served the court, of the casual displays of supernatural power, of the very wrongness of existing in a place humans were never meant to see. But Dorian, in his gruff way, had offered her something unexpected: training. "You're in a world of predators now," he'd said bluntly. "You should at least know how to defend yourself." So she learned basic stances, how to break a grip, where to strike if something inhuman came at her. She would never be a warrior, but the lessons gave her something she'd lost long ago: a sense of control. Domestic life in a Gothic fortress was stranger than any of them had anticipated. One evening, Lila had demanded bedtime stories from both her guardians. Maris had told her a fairy tale about a princess and a tower. Then Lila had turned expectantly to Aldrich. "Your turn." He had stared at her, clearly unprepared. "I do not know children's stories." "Then tell me a king's story." So he had, haltingly at first, recounted an ancient legend of the first vampire lords and their war against the sun. He'd edited out the bloodshed, of course, but Lila had listened with wide-eyed fascination until she drifted off mid-sentence. Another afternoon, Maris had attempted to bake cookies in the castle's cavernous kitchen, a space designed for banquets, not simple human recipes. Lila had insisted on helping. Flour had ended up everywhere. The enchanted oven had nearly incinerated the first batch. Pippin had stolen a raw cookie and gotten sick. And when Mail had wandered in to investigate the commotion, he'd been roped into taste testing, his solemn expression unchanging even as he chewed the burnt offering. "Needs improvement," he'd said diplomatically. Lila had dissolved into giggles. Maris had laughed until she cried. And Aldrich, watching from the doorway, had felt something warm and unfamiliar settle in his chest. Late at night, when Lila slept, Maris and Aldrich found themselves drawn to the eastern balcony, a place where the wards shimmered faintly and the mortal city could be glimpsed in the distance. They didn't plan these meetings. They simply happened. "Do you miss it?" Aldrich asked one night, nodding toward the city lights. "Your old life." Maris was quiet for a long moment. "I miss the idea of it. The illusion that I was in control, that I could fix things if I just tried hard enough." She shook her head. "But the reality? No. That life was killing us both. And this one," she looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. "This one terrifies me. But Lila is thriving. So I'll take terror over despair any day." Aldrich's lips curved into the faintest smile. A practical philosophy. They talked often after that.
About their pasts.
About the parents who'd left them. About the weight of caring for someone so small and fragile. Sometimes they argued. About how much freedom Lila should have. About whether she should be exposed to the court's darker elements. About what would happen when the 6-month trial period ended. But the arguments never felt hostile. They felt like two people learning to build something together, one uncertain brick at a time. The breakthrough came on a cold morning in the therapy chamber. Lila had been working with Mail and Saren for over an hour, sweat beading on her forehead, her small face set with determination. "One more time," she'd insisted when Maris suggested they stop. Aldrich had been summoned when word spread through the court. "She's going to try." He'd arrived to find all 3 guardians already present, arranged in a loose semicircle. Maris stood to one side, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Lila sat in her wheelchair at the center of the room. When she saw Aldrich, her face lit up. "Watch me." He approached slowly and knelt before her. "I am watching." She reached out, and he extended his hands. Her small fingers wrapped around his, so tiny, so warm, so impossibly fragile. "Ready?" Saren asked gently. Lila nodded. She braced herself against Aldrich's grip and pushed. Her legs, thin, twisted, weak, began to straighten. Her face contorted with effort. Every muscle trembled. "You can do this," Maris whispered, tears already streaming down her face. Lila rose. Inch by agonizing inch, she pulled herself upward, using Aldrich's hands as an anchor. Her legs shook violently. Her breath came in short, desperate gasps. But she stood. 2 seconds.
3, 4.
"Lila," Maris's voice broke. 5 seconds. The room held its breath. Then her legs gave out. Aldrich caught her instantly, cradling her against his chest as she collapsed, laughing and crying at the same time. I did it. Did you see? I stood. I saw. His voice was rough, unsteady. You were magnificent. Maris was on her knees, sobbing openly, reaching for her daughter. Aldrich passed Lila to her gently, and the two of them clung to each other, shaking with joy and relief and overwhelming emotion. Dorian had turned away, but his shoulders were suspiciously tight. Mael's eyes glowed brighter than usual. Saren smiled, tears tracking down her pale cheeks. And Aldrich, who had not wept in 800 years, found his vision blurring as he watched them. This, he thought, this is what I fought for. What I've been searching for. Family. But even in that moment of triumph, shadows gathered. Later that evening, Dorian pulled Aldrich aside, his expression grim. There are rumors, my king. Lord Korith's agents have been seen near the outer wards. He's gathering support among the lesser courts. Korith. Aldrich's voice was ice. What does he want? What he's always wanted, your throne. But now he has leverage. Dorian's jaw tightened. He's spreading word about Lila, calling her a weakness, a tool waiting to be claimed. Aldrich's crimson eyes blazed. Let him try.
He will.
Soon. In another chamber, Saren's clouded eyes snapped open from a vision. She gasped, clutching at the air. What did you see? Mael demanded. A test, she whispered. Light and shadow, set against each other. Blood on snow. And a choice that will define everything. When?
Soon.
Very soon. But that night, none of them spoke of the coming storm. Instead, they gathered in Lila's chamber. Maris, Aldrich, and the girl who had become the heart of their strange, fractured family, and pretended, just for a little while, that the darkness would never come. The storm came without warning. Mael felt it first, a wrongness in the air, a tremor in the ancient wards that had protected the Night Court for millennia. He stood on the ramparts as snow began to fall, his pale eyes narrowing as he extended his senses outward. Something's broken through, he murmured. The wind answered him, howling with alarm. He turned and ran. In the war room, Dorian slammed a sealed letter onto the table in front of Aldrich, his expression thunderous. We have a traitor. Aldrich's eyes flicked to the broken wax seal, Lord Korith's sigil. Who? Lord Valen, one of the lesser nobles from the West Wing. He's been feeding information to Korith for weeks. Dorian's hand rested on his sword hilt. Lila's routines. The layout of her chambers. The times when she's most vulnerable. Aldrich rose slowly, his presence filling the room like gathering thunder. Where is he? In custody. But Aldrich. Dorian's voice dropped. If Valen has already sent word, Korith may already be. The warning bells began to toll. Deep, resonant, ancient, they hadn't rung in over 2 centuries. Aldrich's eyes blazed crimson. The fortress is under attack. They moved as one, bursting from the room into corridors that had erupted into chaos. Servants fled past them. Guards rushed toward the outer walls. And somewhere in the distance, steel clashed against steel. Mael materialized from a swirl of ice and wind. The eastern wards are breached. At least 20 hostiles inside, maybe more. They're heading for the residential wings. Lila, Aldrich breathed.
He ran.
Lila woke to the sound of screaming. Her room, usually warm and safe, had gone cold. The enchanted lights flickered wildly. Pippin shrieked and dove under the blankets. Mommy, Lila called out, her voice small and frightened. The door burst open, and Maris rushed in, her face pale but determined. She wore the simple training clothes Dorian had given her and carried a short blade that looked far too large in her trembling hands. Lila, baby, we need to hide. The window exploded inward. Glass rained across the floor as a figure in dark armor dropped into the room, snow swirling in behind him. His eyes glowed amber, and when he smiled, his fangs gleamed. There you are, little Lumen. Maris threw herself between them, the blade raised despite her obvious terror. Stay away from her. The intruder laughed. Foolish mortal. You think that toy can... Light erupted from Lila's hands. Pure, blinding, searing. It filled the room like a flashbang, forcing the vampire to stagger back, hissing in pain as his skin blistered where the light touched. Lila stared at her glowing palms, shocked and terrified. I didn't mean to. Do it again, Maris shouted. But before the attacker could recover, the door splintered off its hinges. Aldrich stood in the doorway, and he was terrifying. His crimson eyes blazed with ancient fury. Shadows coiled around him like living things. His fangs were bared, and the temperature dropped so rapidly that frost crept across the walls. The intruder took one look at him and tried to flee. He didn't make it 3 steps. Aldrich moved faster than human eyes could follow, seizing the vampire by the throat and slamming him against the wall with enough force to crack the stone. His voice was cold, lethal, inhuman. You came into my court. Threaten my family. Explain quickly, or I will make your final moments last centuries. The vampire choked, clawing uselessly at Aldrich's iron grip. Korath sent us. Wants the girl. Where is he? Eastern courtyard. Aldrich's hand tightened, and the vampire's struggle ceased. He dropped the corpse and turned immediately to Lila and Maris. Are you hurt? No, Maris gasped, still clutching her blade. But there are more. I heard them in the halls. I know. He strode to Lila's wheelchair and lifted the child, still glowing faintly, into his arms. Stay close to me, both of you. The corridors had become a battlefield. Aldrich's guards fought desperately against Korath's forces, vampires in dark armor who fought with the precision of trained soldiers. Bodies littered the floor. Blood streaked the ancient stone. Saren appeared from a side passage, her eyes blazing white with power. She raised her hands, and the nearest attackers froze mid-step, their expressions going blank as she trapped them in visions of their own deaths. The throne hall, she called to Aldrich. He's making for the throne hall. Dorian's voice echoed from somewhere ahead. All squads, converge on the central chamber. Do not let them reach the king. Mail descended from above in a whirlwind of ice and lightning. He raised his arms, and the storm followed. Inside the fortress, impossibly, lightning crackling across vaulted ceilings and reducing 2 attackers to ash. Go, he shouted to Aldrich. We'll hold them here. Aldrich hesitated for only a moment. Then he ran, Lila clutched against his chest, Maris struggling to keep pace behind him. They burst into the throne hall to find Lord Korath waiting. He was tall and broad, clad in crimson armor that seemed to drink in the light. His eyes were black pits, and when he smiled, it was all malice. King Varen, how generous of you to bring the prize directly to me. Aldrich set Lila down gently behind his throne and stepped forward, placing himself between her and Korath. You have made a grave mistake. Have I? Korath gestured, and more soldiers poured into the hall from side entrances. You've grown soft, Aldrich, weakened by sentiment. This child has made you vulnerable. She has made me dangerous. Korath laughed and lunged. The clash was brutal and swift. Korath was strong, ancient, ruthless, but Aldrich was fury incarnate. They collided in a blur of shadow and steel, moving so fast that Maris could barely track them. But Korath was not alone. 3 of his soldiers broke away from the main fight, racing toward Lila. Maris threw herself in their path again, slashing wildly with her blade. She managed to cut one across the arm before another backhanded her across the room. She hit the floor hard, gasping. Mommy! Lila screamed. The attackers closed in, and Lila's power exploded. Light burst from her in all directions, wild, instinctive, terrified. It caught the 3 vampires mid-stride, and they burned, screaming as their flesh blackened and crumbled. But the light didn't stop. It spiraled outward, threatening to consume everything, until Aldrich's shadow rose up to meet it. Darkness and light collided, not in opposition, but in harmony. They wrapped around each other, spiraling together, amplifying each other. When they met, They formed something new, a swirling barrier of twilight that held back Koritha's remaining forces like a wall of solid force. Korith stared, shock breaking through his arrogance. That's impossible. Aldrich's voice was as cold as the grave. You were right about one thing. She has changed me. He moved. In 3 heartbeats, it was over. Korith fell, clutching at the wound in his chest, his black eyes wide with disbelief. This isn't over. Yes, Aldrich said quietly. It is. Koritha's body crumbled to ash. Silence fell over the throne hall. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader destroyed, fled into the storm. Aldrich's guards pursued, but he didn't follow. Instead, he turned and found Maris struggling to her feet, blood trickling from a cut above her eye. Lila was sobbing in her wheelchair, the light around her hands finally fading. Aldrich crossed to them and knelt. Are you hurt? I'm fine, Maris lied, wincing. Is it over? For now. He looked at Lila, whose small face was streaked with tears. You were very brave. I was scared, she whispered. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. He gently brushed a tear from her cheek. You protected your mother. You protected yourself. I am proud of you. Lila sniffled and reached for both of them. Aldrich and Maris exchanged a glance. Then together, they embraced her, forming a shield of mortal and immortal around the child who had become the center of their world. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, at that moment, they were safe. The throne hall stood silent in the aftermath. Bodies had been cleared. Blood had been scrubbed from the ancient stone. The shattered windows had been sealed with temporary wards that shimmered faintly in the darkness. But Aldrich remained, standing alone before his throne, staring at nothing. Maris found him there an hour before dawn. You're thinking of sending us away, she said quietly. He didn't turn. It would be safer. For who? She stepped closer, her footsteps echoing. Lila? Or your conscience? For both. His voice was hollow. Korith is dead, but others will come. They will always come. As long as she is here, she is a target. And if we leave, if you hide us away in some mortal refuge, Maris's voice shook. Do you think she'll understand? Do you think she'll forgive being torn away from the only place she's ever felt safe? She would be alive. She would be broken. Maris moved in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. Aldrich, I've already abandoned her once. I won't do it again. And neither will you.
His jaw tightened.
I failed to protect her tonight. The attack reached her chamber. She was terrified. And she survived. We survived. Because we fought together. Maris reached for his hand, still cold, still impossibly strong, and held it between both of hers. You didn't fail her. You saved her. Just like you've been saving her since the moment you found her in the snow. Aldrich's crimson eyes blazed with something raw and desperate. I was abandoned once, left behind by those who were supposed to protect me. I cannot, I will not, become the one who leaves. Then don't, Maris whispered.
Stay.
Let us stay. And let's build something that lasts. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he turned his hand and squeezed hers. You are braver than you know. I learned from the best. They stood together in the dim throne room, a mortal woman and an immortal king, bound by something neither of them had planned, but both had come to need. Come, Aldrich said finally. There is something I must do. Lila was awake when they entered her chamber, sitting up in bed with Pippin curled against her side. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked small and frightened beneath the heavy blankets. Are you leaving? She asked immediately, her voice trembling. Are you sending me away? No, Aldrich said firmly, crossing to her bedside. Never. He knelt so they were eye level, and from within his coat, he produced a small box carved from black obsidian. Silver filigree traced intricate patterns across its surface, 3 symbols intertwined in an endless spiral. What is it? Lila whispered. Aldrich opened the box. Inside, 3 objects glowed softly, a crystal pendant shaped like a snowflake, radiating pale light, a simple silver ring, warm and unadorned, and a dark gem that pulsed with crimson shadows. "These are binding sigils," Aldrich explained gently. "This one," he touched the snowflake, "is yours, Lila. Forged from light magic, attuned to your essence. This 1 inch, the ring, is your mother's, tied to her humanity, her strength, her love. And this, the dark gem, is mine, bound to shadow, to immortality, to the vow I make tonight." Maris's breath caught. Aldrich. He looked at her, then at Lila, his expression more open than either had ever seen. "I vow to guard you both, not as king to subjects, but as family. I will share my power, my protection, my immortality, so that you need never face the world alone again. And these sigils bind us together. They cannot be broken unless all three of us consent."
His voice softened.
"No one will abandon anyone. Not in snow. Not in shadow. Not ever." Tears streamed down Maris's face. She reached into the box with shaking hands and lifted the silver ring, slipping it onto her finger. It warmed immediately, glowing faintly. "I accept," she whispered. "God help me, I accept." Aldrich carefully lifted the snowflake pendant and fastened it around Lila's neck. The light pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Then he took the dark gem and pressed it against his palm. It sank into his skin, leaving a faint mark, 3 intertwined symbols, just above his heart. "We are bound now," he said quietly. "The three of us. A family born of choice, not blood." Lila looked down at her pendant, then up at Aldrich. Her small face broke into a trembling smile. "Does this mean—" She hesitated, then reached out and touched the mark on his chest. "Does this mean you're my daddy now? My dark daddy?" Aldrich froze. Maris pressed a hand over her mouth, tears spilling anew. For several heartbeats, the ancient vampire king, who had ruled for 1,000 years, who had commanded armies and crushed kingdoms, could not speak. Then, slowly, he gathered Lila into his arms and held her close. "Yes," he whispered into her hair. "If you will have me." Lila wrapped her small arms around his neck and nestled into his coat, sighing contentedly. "I love you, Dark Daddy." Maris moved closer, and Aldrich extended one arm to include her in the embrace. The three of them sat together in the soft glow of enchanted light, a strange, impossible family forged in desperation and tempered by love. From the doorway, 3 figures watched in silence. Saren smiled, her clouded eyes distant. "The threads have settled. The future is bright." Dorian's stern expression softened, just slightly. "He's changed." "We all have," Mael murmured. He tilted his head, listening to something only he could sense. "The fortress feels different, warmer, as though winter has finally remembered how to yield to spring." They withdrew quietly, leaving the family to their moment. Outside, dawn approached, though in the night court, true daylight never came. But as the first hints of morning touched the wards, the towers seemed to glow with a softer light than before. Inside, Aldrich sat with Lila asleep in his lap and Maris leaning against his shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. He looked down at them, these 2 fragile, impossible, essential people who had turned his eternal night into something almost like hope, and for the first time in 1,000 years, he allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. Snow continued to fall beyond the windows. But within the night court, a once-abandoned child, a desperate mother, and a lonely king had finally found what they'd been searching for all along. A home.